I'm going to raise some more eyebrows now. In fact, I'm going to take a big sip of beer before I say this one. Independence doesn't mean incredible as it is to believe, but the Craft Beer channel is about to celebrate its 10th anniversary here on YouTube. Many people said it couldn't be done. They said that if the burnout didn't get you, the alcohol would, and I'd probably argue that both did, but it didn't quite take us down. But we have some big announcements about to come. We've got a festival we're going to be organising. We've got an insane amount of collaborations with some of the breweries that have helped us along over the years, and there's lots of exciting stuff coming out. In fact, maybe a big announcement in this week's podcast. We'll have to see how it all shakes out. But I thought this would be a great opportunity to have a little reflection on the last 10 years personally and talk to you about the things that I wish I'd known when I first got into my beer journey. So if you're new to beer, you're new to the channel, there might be lots to learn here, stuff that I wish I'd learned, but if you've also been around for a little while, there'll also be some, I'd say, new perspectives on beer, which I've started to have as a result of thinking things through in this way. So this is my 7 or 8-ish things I wish I knew when I first got into beer. Number 1 has to be that Pilsner is just the best beer style. I mean, there's a reason why 90% of the world only drink Pilsners, and yes, they're crappy facsimiles of the good stuff from Germany and from the Czech Republic, but there's something in the bare bones of that style, in the honey and the cracker and the lemon, and the crushability and the carbonation, all these things that this beer style that was invented in Bohemia at Pilsner Urquell in 1842, there's something about this style that just speaks to humans in a way that no other beer style does. And I wish that at the start of my journey, when I first got back into beer, which would have been about 2010, somebody said to me, all this stuff is fascinating and delicious, but you will be coming back to lager eventually. And I guarantee you, wherever you are in your journey, you will be coming back to lager as well. Now there's this kind of normcore movement in beer where even craft breweries are producing light lagers and singing their praises. Like 2 years ago they weren't making marketing that literally took the mick out of it. But light lagers do have a place in the same way that, you know, a cheap white roll does for a bacon sandwich. But really that's not what I got into beer about, and although I occasionally drink those beers, it's actually the really good lagers that I've fallen in love with more than any other beer style in the world. Which is why, while I do the rest of this video, I'm going to be drinking this delicious thing from Utopian, one of my favourite breweries in the UK. They make essentially German and Czech style beers, but all with British ingredients. And what I love about that is the fact that, yes, it's still a lager. Yes, it might remind you of a big lager, and I think that's why so many of us stayed away from it back in like 2010, and also because nobody was really making really good lager back then outside of its homeland. But what I love about this is you can get your own stamp in it. With IPAs, it's always going to taste like an American IPA, and with this stuff you can really put your own stamp on it with your own ingredients, your own processes, your own approaches. Now while I'm talking about lager, the other thing I want to talk about is the fact that I have learned now to hard pour my lagers, right? Foam is the best thing about beer, right? It is deliciously smooth, it protects the liquid underneath, and I have thrown all caution to the wind and started pouring my beers like this. And you can't tell me that doesn't look a million times better than some anemic ½ centimetre of head. Just look at how beautiful that is. So the exact reasons that we reject Pilsner and, you know, Hellers and other lager styles when we first get into beer, which is that the flavour is more subtle, it's what we've been drinking for years and potentially not particularly enjoying, is exactly the reason why we will come back to lager, why everybody comes back to lager, and that is because it is crisp, it is refreshing, it is uncomplicated, but there are complicated nuances there if you go digging and if you learn everything from the journey that you've taken into God knows what pastry stouts and smoothie sours and all that delicious utter nonsense. Number 2 is a mistake I've been making ever since I got into beer, and indeed continue to make if you look at my garage, and that is that storage is more important than freshness. We talk endlessly about how we should drink all our beer fresh, about how it's best at the brewery, about, you know, short dates. You know, some people going like, yo, this beer's got 3 months on it on the bottom of the can. I'm not going to be drinking that. And it's absolute nonsense. It really is absolute nonsense if you store your beer properly. Get a beer fridge like we have in the Brudio, put it at 4 degrees, and your IPAs, well-made IPAs, should last 6 months, 9 months. I think the reason that freshness got so fetishized is A, because it's really easy to communicate, B, because it's really easy to do. You don't have to get beer fridge. You don't have to do anything other than check the bottom of the can and see, because it is perhaps more than storage, a guarantee that the beer is going to be good, because for the simple reason that if it's only a month old, there's only so much damage that can have been done. But ultimately, it's the storage that really matters. So don't buy ambient beer if you can avoid it. Check the dates by all means, that's going to help as well. But it's where the beer's been, how it's been treated, whether it's a month old or a year old. And on that note, the other mistake I've been making, if you look to my garage, is just never age beer. It's so hard to do right. The results are so mixed. And at the end of the day, brewers release a beer at a certain time because they know that it's ready and it's going to be delicious drunk then. And obviously there's exceptions, namely unfruited lambics, which really can improve in bottle. And, you know, when there's Brett involved, it's a fairly reliable process. But as a general rule, do not age your beers, drink them fresh as the brewer intended. I think the biggest and most recent lesson I've really learned in beer is that the traditional beer styles of your country, wherever you are the most important beer styles in your life, or they should be, because they are the ones that speak to the culture of where you are, the place where you are, the ingredients where you are, of the production process that's in your area. You know, drinking traditional beer often means promoting your local farmers, supporting your local shops and all that kind of stuff, which is incredibly important in this globalized world that we live in. But it's also pretty much all about preserving that unique culture that we have. If we all get obsessed with American style brewing or Belgian style brewing or German style brewing, we're going to start to lose the cultures that we have. And we learned that when we did our cask ale series. Luckily, we've always loved cask, but we've never quite understood how incredibly important it is to the beer industry as a whole, to the entire value chain. It's been really interesting traveling around the world over the last 10 years, because all the reasons that we visit particular nations like Germany and Belgium is to taste the styles of beers that the locals don't really care about, you know? When we go to Munich and we talk about, you know, these admittedly very big corporations that are making amazing lager, it's kind of dismissed by the German population quite a bit. And yet, if we had beers of that quality in the UK, we'd be super excited. And the same goes, you know, Americans coming over to the UK, they come to drink cask. I see beer geeks from America getting very excited over Green King IPA, which is universally dismissed as a terrible beer here actually in the UK. And you could say the same for Belgium as well. Some of my favourite beers are Belgian Blondes, which is a style that within the beer geek community is just a nothing. You know, you never really see beer geeks in Belgium drinking these beers or talking about these beers unless they're made by very modern producers, in which case there's this new marketing slant on it. The next lesson is one that we've been banging on about on the Craft Beer channel for quite some time, but never done a specific video on it other than talking about Untapped. And that is this notion that there are lots of reasons why the beer you're drinking at any particular moment might not be very good, and the chances of it being because the brewer messed up is actually not as big as you think it might be. So yes, the brewer made a mistake during the brew day or during the fermentation, or might have packaged it poorly. It might be that the ingredients that they used weren't that great either, or not as good as they thought they were. But there's also lots of other reasons. It may be that the beer wasn't stored properly. It may be that the lines were dirty. It may be that the tap was dirty. It may be that the glassware was dirty. It may be that the beer is not as fresh as it should be. But it could also be a couple of things that are more, well, they're more to do with you. It might be to do with what you had for dinner, which changes your palate. It might be the beer that you had before. It might be the mood that you're in, the music that's on, the temperature of the beer, or the temperature of the place that you're in. Beer is so incredibly contextual. It could be about the people you're drinking with. That happens quite a bit. And being dismissive of a brewery or a pub or a person as a result of that isn't necessarily fair. So I've had a Czech Pilsner. I'm now going for a German one, a brewery not too far from me, and a brewery that makes delicious beer. Pour hard. Get that lovely frothy head on the top. And there we go. Do you know, I'm going to be entirely honest with you. That's too much head. So related to the last lesson, we need to talk about hype. We have a whole series called The Hype Train, in which we track down beers from breweries that get a lot of hype and have a lot of expectation and a lot of reputation to see whether they're worth it. And from the ones that we've picked, actually, a lot of them have been exceptionally good, but hype is rarely, very rarely justified. Hype is sort of made by two things. One, it's made by a brewery that makes quality beer, but two, it's made by the amount of noise that they make. And they may be making that noise through, I don't know, a wonderful Instagram feed, running a festival full of people that are untapping, giving them incredibly high Untapped scores, or attending a festival like that. In particular, Mikkeller Beer Celebration was known that if you went there with an IPA or a pastry stout, you'd come away with a very high Untapped beer, and that would help you. But really, what we have to bear in mind is that it's the second thing that really matters, the amount of noise that you can make. And some breweries are just better at doing that. And we have always been absolutely blown away by traveling around the world by how many great breweries are just not talked about for very simple reasons. One is they might not have a marketing person. They might not produce the beers that people get incredibly excited about. Pilsners, wheat beers, Belgian blondes, you know, all of these styles that are not going to get to the top of any kind of rating website. So what I would say to you is absolutely track down these hype beers, but before you do, have a little look around your local area or online if you're in the right country where you can ship alcohol online, and just find some breweries that make similar styles, because you know what, the chances are the beer is going to be within 5% as good, they just don't have as good a marketing. So hype is rarely justified. It's kind of a guarantee. You know you're going to get good beer at one of these places, but the idea of these hundreds of New England IPA breweries all being the best breweries in the world, no, it's nonsense. Now this next lesson I've learned is going to raise some eyebrows, because some would argue I haven't actually learned it. Hey Beer Geeks, just a quick note to let you know that the Craft Beer channel is powered by Patreon.
Sign up for exclusive merchandise and discounts,
as well as access to our amazing Discord forum full of us, amazing beer geeks, and of course, homebrewers.
Every one of you guys and girls out there that signs up to join our Patreon, you are helping us keep the lights on at Craft Beer Towers. You are supporting independent content. I can't make that any clearer.
Absolutely, and as well as doing that, you're helping us support small and amazing craft brewers. So sign up at patreon.com/craftbeerchannel or hit the links above. Cheers.
Cheers. Love and beer.
And that is the idea that snobbery gets us nowhere. So if you look at the comment section of any of the blind taste tests I've done, I'd say most of the internet regards me as a beer snob. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. For a start, I did find good beer within like the bad macro taste test. Well, good beer, decent enough beer. But what we've always tried to do on the Craft Beer channel is never judge people for what they drink. And that's what I'm trying to drill down to here. We all have different tastes. We all have different palates. And there's no beer that is objectively, or at least beer style, that is objectively or subjectively better or worse than the other. And as soon as we start to gatekeep, as soon as we start to go, I know the classic one is quick sours aren't, real sours, just make a mixed firm beer. They're entirely different styles, both delicious in entirely different ways. Or saying that New England IPA is like beer for people who don't like the taste of beer. Beer tastes of cherries in Belgium, it tastes of pine in America, it tastes of honey in Germany, it tastes of twigs in the UK. There is no specific beer flavour. Even within each ingredient there's loads of changes, and we all like different things. And as soon as we start to go, this is better, this is worse, that's not manly, not womanly, not what beer should taste like. All of these kind of nonsense terms we do where we try to apply and force meaning onto a very diverse, interesting drink that absolutely anybody can and should be able to enjoy. We start to damage the literal beer and the culture that we're in. So no snobbery, and if I've ever come across as snobby, I heartily apologise. I'm going to raise some more eyebrows now. In fact, I'm going to take a big sip of beer before I say this one. Independence doesn't mean shit. We spent 6-7 years of the channel banging the drum for independent beer. And we never stopped to think, are these independent breweries that we're championing doing good? Yes, many of them are making great beer, but are they doing good? And we just kind of assumed it, because if you say that this is an independent, small business, it's assumed that you're ethical. But that's just not the case, as so much is shown in recent years, and we've done videos about sexism in beer, about racism in beer, and obviously there's been incredible work by people like Ren of Beer Diversity, of Dr. Jackson, Dr. J, of Brianne Allen, who started the whole Me Too movement in beer. Independence is a means to an end. With independence, you have more power to do things right, to be ethical, to make things better. But independence, it doesn't mean anything if you're not actually using that independence for good, which is why we changed our whole policy about whether we put independent beer on the channel. We basically entirely scrapped that idea and replaced it with ethical. So we look at the ethics, we research every brewery that we feature on the channel. And then off the back of that, we make a decision about whether to feature them, whether they're big, small, independent or not, whether it's private equity, whether it's another brewery, whether it's, I don't know, some person who's done something unethical in their life owning a brewery. We pay attention to all of that, and that's how we make our decisions. And that's how you should be making your decisions about what you drink as well. Because like I say, independence doesn't mean anything if you don't do something good with it. Now, the final lesson was a lesson I learned, I think, in about 2019, just before the pandemic, which was when I got very cynical. I got very bored of the endless churn of new breweries that were essentially producing the same beers, and it all became kind of meaningless. We started covering the same stories, covering the same styles, and I was getting pretty bored and jaded with it. And you might have been able to see that in the content that we were producing. And in a weird way, the pandemic kind of rescued us out of that. It got us into homebrewing, it got us rethinking about how we were making content. But there is going to be a time where you will get bored and cynical and start to really question why you've gone so deep into this rabbit hole. And what I would say is persevere. Bear in mind all the other rules that I've talked about here that hopefully will improve, increase the amount of fun that you can have drinking beer, and just try not to get cynical, because at the end of the day, beer is a fun drink. We should be drinking exactly what we want to drink. We need to remove this kind of FOMO feeling as much as we can and just go, you know what, I'm not going to taste Heady Topper anytime soon. But luckily, you know, I know Siren Brewery have brewed a beer inspired by it, and it was absolutely excellent back when they made it. You know, there's always going to be a way for us to drink local, to get hold of local beers that are just as good as everything else, and we don't have to be on this constant hunt, this constant churn for something new. And I think that that is going to be a really interesting way that craft beer is going to shake out, because we've already seen that that churn is starting to slow down, that people are starting to look for reliability. We started seeing that craft beer is almost kind of I hesitate to use a cliche, but jump the shark. You know, we've pushed the churn too hard, we've pushed the styles too hard, and now people are just looking for a Pilsner in a quiet corner. And that's very much the phase that I was in 2019, but I've got really excited about the chase again, because there's so much more variation in what's being brewed, so much more excitement, so much more story. And Brad and I are very excited to be traveling again after the pandemic to discover that. So to summarise everything that I've learned about beer, and to some extent everything I think that Brad has learned about beer, it's that we shouldn't worry too much about the chase. We should enjoy it if we enjoy it, but if not, we shouldn't let that come at the expense of our enjoyment. Really, beer is about being social and about spending time with friends and in beautiful places, or indeed making new friends and sharing knowledge. So that is what we think you should get from beer, and maybe the people that aren't into craft beer have known that all along and just been enjoying crispy Pilsners. But that's the message for us in our 10th anniversary, and I hope that many of you can make new friends or indeed meet old ones at our festival coming in September. Cheers.